Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rick. Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for attending this seminar this morning. Today, as Rick has said, I'll be giving a presentation on the best practice guidelines for drink driving enforcement and prevention. Now, I'd like to start first by giving you an overview of today's presentation. Now, I'm going to start by giving you a brief background to the drink driving problem here in Australia, and then I'm going to move on and talk about the best practice guidelines under the 5 headings that you see there. I'll start with random breath testing, I'll talk about publicity campaigns, drink driving penalties, rehabilitation programs, and I'll conclude by talking about ignition interlocks. Now, as Rick said, I've been involved in a number of projects, and so this presentation draws on the comprehensive body of research that I've done in that period of time. Now, one of the things that that became very apparent to me very early on when you look at drink driving from an international perspective is that you see that certain countries have become much better than other countries at particular aspects of drink driving. Australia, for example, is widely regarded as a world leader when it comes to RBT. In fact, the majority of research on RBT comes from right here in Australia. The US and Canada, on the other hand, have really led the world when it comes to rehabilitation programs and ignition interlocks. Scandinavian countries like Sweden and Norway, on the other hand, have been at the forefront when you look at per se drink driving laws, the BAC laws, blood alcohol concentration laws. In fact, the very first per se drink driving law was enacted by Norway all the way back in 1936. So considering international experiences when it comes to drink driving is very important. So what I'll be doing today is drawing on all the international experiences and Australian experiences to give you an understanding of these responses here, more importantly, to give you an understanding of the most effective way to deliver these responses to achieve positive outcomes for road safety. Now, before I move on to that, I will start by giving you a brief background to the drink driving problem here in Australia. Drink driving accounts for approximately 30% of road fatalities and approximately 9% of serious injury crashes each year. In addition to the social costs, there are significant economic costs associated with road fatalities and injuries. Each fatal crash costs the Australian community an estimated $2.6 million, and each hospitalization crash is estimated to cost $266,000. Now, between 2010 and 2011, over 80,000 drink drivers were convicted of drink driving. And I should also point out that the statistics from New South Wales were suspiciously low for the size of the state, and I was unable to confirm those numbers. So that number is likely to be higher than that. But that notwithstanding, arrest data, we all know, typically underrepresents the crime. So the true extent of drink driving is likely to be significantly higher than that. So as you can see, drink driving continues to be a significant road safety problem as motorists continue to drive while impaired by alcohol and thereby putting their lives and the lives of other road users at significant risk. These risks have been widely documented in the drink driving literature as illustrated in this graph here. As you can see, the risk of being involved in a serious crash increases significantly as the blood alcohol concentration, or BAC, increases, so that at 0.05, a driver has double the risk of a serious crash than at 0, and at 0.08, the risk is double that at 0.05. BAC tolerances vary by country. In Australia, the limit is 0.05, although a 0 limit generally applies for restricted and commercial drivers. The limit in the US, UK, and New Zealand is higher at 0.08. Sweden, on the other hand, which has one of the best road safety records in the world, has a much lower limit at 0.02. I won't be discussing BAC limits today. However, this is something this is a discussion that's it's going to become more prevalent. You're going to see more of it as jurisdictions here in Australia start considering lowering their BAC. In fact, most recently, the Assistant Commissioner in Victoria added to this discussion when he said that he supported lowering the BAC from 0.05 to 0.02 in Victoria. So now that I've given you that brief background, I'm going to move on and talk about the best practice guidelines for the enforcement and prevention of drink driving, and I'm going to start with RBT. In Australia, RBT was first implemented in Victoria in 1976 and is now the main method of enforcement in all Australian jurisdictions and in New Zealand as well. It empowers police to breath test drivers at any time, even if they do not exhibit behavior suggesting the prior consumption of alcohol. RBT is widely acknowledged as having the single biggest impact on drink driving since the 1980s. Now, there are two types of RBT enforcement. There is static RBT and mobile RBT. This here, courtesy of our good friends in New Zealand, is an example of a static RBT. Static RBTs are highly visible checkpoints that are set up on high-volume roads. The main goal of static RBT enforcement is to test large numbers of drivers and to be viewed by a large number of motorists. Drivers who fail a preliminary roadside test are required to undergo evidentiary tests on a more accurate machine, and these results are used to determine whether the driver is over the relevant BAC limit. On the other hand, mobile RBT enforcement is carried out by police in patrol vehicles equipped with preliminary breath testing devices. Drivers who fail the preliminary test are driven to police stations for evidentiary breath testing. Mobile units can be used in targeted RBT operations and as support vehicles during static RBT operations. Now, the person who is largely responsible for our understanding of RBT and deterrence is Ross Homel. Homel adapted the classical criminological deterrence theory, which, as highlighted by Gibbs, states that the rate for a particular type of crime varies inversely with the celerity, certainty, and severity of punishments of that type of crime. Celerity means swiftness. His argument was that drivers who were aware of RBT operations would have increased perceptions of probability of detection and, due to fear of punishment, would be less likely to drink drive. So RBT is really all about increasing the subjective probability of detection. There are two deterrence mechanisms at play. There's general deterrence and specific deterrence. General deterrence applies to all drivers who are aware of RBT operations, while specific deterrence applies to those drivers who have been previously caught and punished for drink driving. The primary aim of RBT is general deterrence. The secondary aim is specific deterrence. That is, and this is the point that I'd really like to stress, the primary aim of RBT is in the deterrence of drink driving, not in the detection of drink drivers. In fact, Ross Homel dedicated his work in the 80s and early 90s to clearing up this confusion. However, there was and still is a lot of confusion about the primary role of RBT as a deterrence mechanism. In the US, UK, and Canada, where there's been a push to introduce RBT in recent times, I've noticed some comments that reflect this confusion as well. In the UK, for example, the Home Office stated that they would not support the implementation of RBT because it's inefficient in catching drink drive offenders. That particular comment would probably drive Ross Homel just a little bit crazy. So there's confusion about the role of RBT as a deterrence measure rather than a detection measure exists even today. Now, deterrence is an unstable process, and individuals can be undeterred. As Homel's hole in the bucket diagram illustrates, there are factors that can undermine deterrence, such as peer pressure and lack of exposure to RBT. So not only should RBT create deterrence, but importantly, it needs to sustain deterrence. However, as Homel states, it's in fact quite easy to introduce RBT and associated publicity in a way which will guarantee that it will not work. So, how should RBT be implemented in a way which works? Today I'm going to discuss 5 key guidelines for effectively implementing RBT in a way which works. So the first guideline is that the primary goal of RBT enforcement should be to create and sustain general deterrence. And this is effectively achieved in a number of ways. First, the main method of RBT delivery should be highly visible static checkpoints. RBT locations should not be predictable. They should appear random and ubiquitous. All drivers who were stopped at RBT checkpoints should be tested. So that means if you've got a young uni student in a Nissan Skyline, middle-aged executive in a Porsche 911, or a 60-year-old retiree in a Toyota Prius, it doesn't matter. All of them should be breath tested. A failure to do so sends the message that only drivers who fit a certain profile get breath tested, and that leads to drivers becoming undeterred. Static RBT checkpoints should be strategically planned to prevent drivers from using avoidance tactics, such as stopping short, doing U-turns, or turning into back streets. And this problem was best illustrated in Adelaide, where the introduction of RBT led to a 40% increase in nighttime road crashes on Adelaide's back streets. A recent national self-report study also found 13% of participants reported using avoidance tactics to evade RBT checkpoints. So police should aim to disrupt such avoidance tactics by planning RBT sites strategically and using mobile RBT units to support static RBT operations. Now, the second guideline is that police who are involved with RBT should be educated on the deterrence mechanisms of RBT. As I mentioned before, there's a great deal of confusion about the primary role of RBT as an enforcement tool for deterrence and not a tool for detection. Police are not immune from this confusion. In the past, police have focused on detection-based RBT at the expense of deterrence-based RBT for several reasons. The detection of drink drivers may be mistakenly viewed as a measure of success. Police may find deterrence-based RBT boring and insignificant, as it also deprives them of their normal clientele, that being offenders. A lack of education and competing workloads can lead police to undermine RBT operations in favor of other duties, and in extreme cases may lead to corrupt practices. For example, in 2001, the Western Australia Ombudsman found that at least 35% of recorded breath tests had been falsified by police on mobile patrol. The third guideline is that RBT should be strategically deployed during high alcohol hours. Alcohol consumption does not occur uniformly over time. Unsurprisingly, drink driving does not occur uniformly over time. High alcohol hours are periods when we expect alcohol consumption to be high, for example, on a Friday or Saturday night and during public holidays. RBT enforcement prior to high alcohol hours, for example, on a Friday or Saturday afternoon, has been shown to be an effective means of deterring drink driving and preventing nighttime crashes. RBT enforcement during high alcohol hours, for example, between 8 p.m. and 5 a.m. on Friday or Saturday, has been shown to be an effective means of targeting drink drivers and maximizing specific deterrence, which is a secondary aim of RBT. And for specific deterrence to be effective, all drivers who are caught drink driving should be charged with the appropriate offense and not let off. And I know that sounds, that's a rather obvious one, but I just make the point because a recent national self-report study that was conducted by the National Drug Law Enforcement and Research Fund found that 8% of participants reported that they had been caught drink driving and they had been let off without any penalties whatsoever. Now, that obviously, according to Hommel's hole-in-the-bucket model, would lead those drivers to become undeterred, meaning that they would be more likely to drink drive again in the future. The fourth guideline is that police should breath test a large proportion of licensed drivers each year, but targets should be implemented as guidelines and not strict quotas. Recent research highlights that direct personal contact with breath testing has the most significant deterrent impact on drink driving, and therefore police should aim to breath test a large proportion of licensed drivers each year. Many jurisdictions now set targets for the number of breath tests that should be conducted each year. These targets are crucial in maintaining a high level of testing, but research suggests they should be implemented as guidelines rather than strict targets. Strict targets may lead police to focus on non-strategic RBT enforcement, for example, by conducting tests when traffic is high on weekday afternoons to increase numbers and not testing on weekends when there's a higher likelihood for drink driving. And the final guideline that I'm going to talk about is that RBT should be adapted to rural areas. RBT is less effective in rural areas for several reasons. A lack or infrequency of alternative transport coupled with greater travel distances means people are more likely to rely on their personal vehicles for transport, and limited police resources in these areas may hinder the adequate delivery of deterrence-based enforcement. However, the biggest problem in rural areas is that word gets around very quickly when police establish any sort of RBT operations. So drinkers can easily find out where police are conducting breath testing. And a study of rural drivers in Victoria and South Australia found that unlike drivers in urban areas, drivers who were aware of RBT in rural areas didn't think their chances of being caught were high because they knew they could easily avoid them. So to address this, it's been suggested that police in rural areas should have a relative focus on mobile RBT enforcement, because mobile RBT is more unpredictable and can be used to patrol backstreets, which are common in rural areas. Another interesting finding in the rural study was that drivers who drove to licensed premises were highly likely to drink drive back home. In the study that was conducted, only 14% of intoxicated patrons chose an alternative means of transport home. So 86% drove home under the influence of alcohol. This suggests that police should focus on influencing the decision to drive to a licensed premise, as it's very difficult to influence the decision to drive from the licensed premise. The literature suggests that the decision to drive to a licensed premise could be best influenced through highly visible enforcement prior to high alcohol hours in rural areas. So the 5 guidelines I've just discussed have been highlighted in the research for the effective delivery of RBT. Now moving on, RBT also needs to be supported by other activities to maximize its effectiveness and to sustain the prevention of drink driving. I'm going to discuss these activities next, starting with publicity campaigns. But before I move on to publicity campaigns, I'd like to play you a few drink driving advertisements just to give you an illustration of what I'll be talking about and to highlight the general themes that emerge from drink driving campaigns.
Thanks for your help, mate.
Yeah, hang on, I'll just get Dad.
Oh, booze buzz, eh?
Yeah.
Ah, it's a bit early, isn't it?
All right, Billy. Yeah, thanks for the tip-off.
It's down the road in Linden Street.
Oh, I thought we were supposed to get a warning.
We just did, mate.
Right, I'm off.
Thanks for your help, mate.
Go on, one more's not going to kill you.
Hey, I'm still capable of driving. How about you?
I've been driving home a long time, mate, and nothing's happened to me yet.
I've got to go. See you, fellas.
You right, Dad?
Yeah, no worries.
Maybe I should have passed that last beer. Realised how stuffed I was looking in all those bloody miles.
Yeah, Billy reckons you ought to cut across the highway at Ferguson's Road.
Did he?
Hey, Dad, is that Billy's car down there?
Nah, no way. Bloody funny if he did get caught, though, eh?
G'day.
Thanks.
Hello, Paul.
Oh, no, thanks, love.
Hey, he was just here if he's... Yeah, righto.
Drink up. Here you go, darling. There's another beer.
We won't catch you here. Or here. And we won't catch you here.
But already this holiday season, police have caught over 730 people who drove over the alcohol limit, plus another 24 who drove on drugs.
Enjoy yourself this Christmas, but just don't drive afterwards, because we will catch you before someone gets hurt. Scotland has just got tougher on drink driving. Get caught and we'll take away your licence. Get caught again and we can take away your car. So you don't take away a life.
Oh no, George is driving. He's too wasted. I should say something, but I could look dumb in front of Monique. Bro, Monique says you're dumb, but if he crashes, I'll have to live with his family.
Puzzle time.
And if he dies, Ghost George will haunt me forever.
Grab a chip. Want a chip? You know I can't grab your ghost chips. Go away.
Spoon.
Spacehead. Bro, Willie, what are you doing, bro?
Oh, I've been internalizing a really complicated situation in my head.
What are you on about?
I don't think you should drive.
Nah.
Nah, you're too drunk, bro. Just crash here.
Yes, crash here. Okay.
Stop a mate from driving drunk. Legend.
All right. Now, two general themes emerge from those videos. Some campaigns highlight the legal consequences of drink driving, while some highlight the social harm of drink driving. Now, there's no research evidence to suggest one type of media advertisement is more effective than the other. However, it has been noted that those that highlight the legal consequences are more likely to influence individual behavior, while those that highlight the social harm are more likely to influence the community's perceptions of drink driving as a dangerous activity, and also increase the support for drink driving countermeasures like RBT. Now, it has been found that paid media advertisements, as opposed to unpaid or donated media time, are more effective as they are given priority by broadcasting stations and are aired at desired times when the target demographic is likely to be engaged. Media advertisements should also be pre-tested with a target demographic. Now, this was highlighted in California, where a media advertisement that was intended to promote moderate drinking was not pre-tested. And halfway through its life, it was found that over 1/3 of survey respondents thought it promoted drinking, and it was often mistaken for a beer commercial. Media advertisements should be linked to RBT enforcement. This was best illustrated in two similar evaluations from Victoria and New Zealand. After statistically controlling for other factors, the Victorian publicity campaign was linked to a reduction in drink driving, while the New Zealand publicity campaign had little impact on drink driving. Both studies highlight the link between publicity campaign and RBT enforcement as being the most important factor in their respective outcomes. So the idea here is, if you're running a publicity campaign, a media advertisement, it's important to also focus your enforcement or increase enforcement of drink driving to reinforce that message that's being delivered through the publicity campaign, to maximize the effectiveness of the publicity campaign. Now, this also highlights the need for transport authorities, who often fund publicity campaigns, to work with police agencies who are responsible for RBT enforcement. A recent study by the National Drug Law Enforcement and Research Fund concluded that publicity campaigns should include facts to make RBT credible and therefore more effective in deterring drink driving. Now, facts can include information such as the number of drivers tested and the number of drivers charged with drink driving within a given enforcement period. In rural areas, media advertising and public education should focus on trying to influence the decisions made prior to driving to a licensed premise. As I mentioned previously, drivers in rural areas who drive to licensed premises are highly unlikely to use alternative transport. So publicity campaigns could, for example, focus on alternative ways a person can travel to a licensed premise rather than alternative ways that they can leave the licensed premise. Studies in rural areas also suggest that media advertising that focuses on community values and community disapproval of drink driving may be more effective. RBT needs to be supported by effective penalties. Penalties are an important aspect of the RBT deterrence model. It is the swiftness, certainty, and severity of punishments that makes motorists view drink driving as a potentially costly and undesirable behavior. However, increasing the severity of penalties does not necessarily lead to a similar increase in deterrence. Among the general population, it's the perceived certainty of detection that has the strongest deterrent impact. And this was best demonstrated in 1998, when New South Wales doubled most of its drink driving penalties, such as fines and license disqualification periods. Subsequent evaluations found this had a minimal impact on drink driving offences, particularly considering the significant increase in penalties. In this particular case, it was noted by researchers that improved drink driving enforcement would have been more beneficial than simply increasing the severity of penalties. The most effective drink driving penalty is license disqualification, even allowing for the fact that some disqualified drivers continue to drive while disqualified. Unlicensed drivers are more likely to be recidivist drink drivers and are also more likely to be involved in crashes when compared to the general population. License disqualification can be further strengthened by addressing unlicensed driving through vehicle impoundment. This strategy has been effective in jurisdictions like California and New Zealand, where vehicle impoundment led to significantly reduced levels of unlicensed driving as determined by traffic convictions and road crashes by unlicensed drivers. Furthermore, increasing the perceived threat of detection for unlicensed driving through systematic license checks can further strengthen the license disqualification penalty. In this regard, requiring all drivers to carry their licenses while driving would aid the police in systematically checking for unlicensed driving. And I make that point because in some jurisdictions it's not compulsory to carry, for open license holders, it's not compulsory to carry the driver's license. That just makes the job of the police that much harder because they then need to follow up with that individual, get them to come back to a police station and show their driver's license. So that might actually discourage police from systematically checking people's licenses. Now, because license disqualification is the most effective drink driving penalty, it needs to be applied swiftly and systematically. This penalty is weakened when it is substituted for other interventions or court programs. In a New South Wales evaluation, for example, it was found that 20% of convicted drink drivers were spared license disqualifications due to dismissals. Research from a number of countries, and particularly from North America, tells us that imprisonment, which is commonly reserved for serious and recidivist drink drivers, is an ineffective and costly penalty. Beyond the physical incapacitation of drink drivers, imprisonment does not appear to decrease the likelihood of drink driving after incarceration. When it comes to serious and recidivist drink drivers, there's a much greater support for rehabilitation programs. Now, when we talk about serious drink drivers, serious offenders, the definition in Australia is fairly consistent. Basically, any driver who is caught driving with a BAC above 0.15, which is 3 times the legal limit. So, rehabilitation programs. These programs are necessary for serious and recidivist drink drivers because they are much less likely to be influenced by conventional countermeasures and penalties. This group of drivers has received increased attention in the recent past due to their offending patterns. Recidivist drink drivers, for example, make up 20 to 30% of the drink driving population, but they contribute disproportionately to road trauma. And this is because of their high blood alcohol content levels and their repeat offenses. Serious and recidivist drink drivers are commonly found to have positive attitudes to drink driving. By that I mean they don't think it's a bad thing or a dangerous thing to be doing. And they're also often found to have alcohol-related disorders. Rehabilitation programs aim to separate drinking and driving by addressing underlying causes of drink driving, such as alcohol dependence and a lack of education. They have been found to have a largely positive impact on recidivism when participants complete the program. Now, it's been noted that rehabilitation programs should be linked to the penalty system rather than the relicensing system. Some rehabilitation programs are attached to the relicensing system, and this means that only those who are motivated to continue driving legally will attend these programs. So the drawback of this system is that it fails to capture those drink drivers who are willing to drive unlicensed. Attaching rehabilitation to the penalty through the judicial process has been noted as an effective solution to this problem. Because serious and recidivist drink drivers are not homogeneous, it's important to screen participants to determine the most appropriate treatment for each participant. Literacy levels and learning styles should also be taken into account in this process. To maximize effectiveness, courses should be conducted in small groups of about 10 to enable responses to be tailored to each individual participant. Evaluations show that the most effective rehabilitation programs are those that combine education, psychotherapy, and probationary supervision. Rehabilitation programs are also most effective when combined with sanctions that limit access to vehicles, such as license disqualifications and ignition interlocks. Ignition interlocks is a device, it's a breathalyzer device which is fitted to the ignition system of a car and prevents the car from being started until a satisfactory sample of breath is provided. It acts like a barrier between the drinking driver and the car. So it can therefore be considered as a device that fosters behavioral change because the driver has to develop strategies to separate their drinking and their driving. Ignition interlocks have a number of features to prevent circumvention. For example, the device may randomly request a sample of breath while the vehicle is in motion to prevent bystanders from helping the driver to start the car. The device also records all BAC readings, including any attempts to bypass the system, and these readings can then be downloaded by authorities to monitor the driver's behavior. Compared to overseas jurisdictions, the adoption of ignition interlocks has been relatively slow in Australia, and its use has been relatively limited. However, a number of jurisdictions have introduced ignition interlock legislations in recent years. In Queensland, South Australia, and Victoria, the legislation now mandates the installation of the device for serious and repeat drink driving offenders as a relicensing condition. New South Wales offers ignition interlocks on a voluntary basis in exchange for reduced license disqualification periods. In the Northern Territory, the courts may mandate the installation of the device for repeat offenders who have held an open license for at least 5 years. The introduction of ignition interlock legislations in Australia is a promising move because evaluations from US, Canada, and Sweden consistently tells us that ignition interlocks are highly effective in preventing drink driving while they're installed. Now, there's a bit of a catch with the ignition interlocks. Actually, it's a pretty big catch, if I'm honest. The problem with these devices is that drink driving behavior tends to return once these devices are removed. Now, the most promising solution to this problem, which has actually got very strong support in the research, is the use of ignition interlocks in combination with rehabilitation programs. And that is most likely because ignition interlocks foster behavioral change by creating a physical barrier between the drinking driver and the car, while rehabilitation programs aim to separate drinking and driving by addressing underlying causes such as alcohol disorders and a lack of education. The ignition interlocks reflect a situational crime prevention approach, while rehabilitation reflects a psychosocial approach. And these two responses represent a holistic approach that's been highly effective in preventing drink driving among these hardcore offenders. It has also been noted in the literature that a short education course just prior to the removal of the ignition interlock, that's when the person goes to reapply for an open license again, such a short education course might be beneficial in preventing drink driving behavior from returning. So, in conclusion, I've outlined the best practice guidelines for the enforcement and prevention of drink driving. I've highlighted the importance of deterrence-based RBT and the need for RBT to be supported by effective publicity campaigns, drink driving penalties, rehabilitation, and ignition interlock programs. I've also highlighted the need for a drink driving framework that recognizes that drink drivers are not a homogeneous group. A tailored response is necessary, particularly for serious and recidivist offenders, to adequately address the underlying causes of drink driving behavior and to foster long-term behavioral change. So I hope I've given you an understanding of the drink driving problem and some of the responses that have been implemented, and an appreciation of why it's so important to have this holistic approach to address this significant road safety issue. And on those concluding remarks, I will end my presentation. Again, thank you all for attending the presentation today.